and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the esteemed panel of Bangabandhu and Bangladesh's foreign policy. This is the second panel on the same topic, orchestrated by the Global Studies and Governance Program at IUB. We are commemorating UN Day, and the GSG program has rebaptized it as the Global Day. This year is of great significance for us as we celebrate 2020 as Mujib Borsho to mark our founding father's birth centenary. Given the current global context and most importantly, the growing global chaos, be it the pandemic or the Rohingyas or even the significance of Bangladesh's geospace owing to Bay of Bengal, it is a time that we are all engaged on the direction of a foreign policy. And these would remain unresolved as here one of our experts, Ambassador Karim says, if they remain unresolved, if we do not re-examine the foundation of a policy that were laid down by the father of the nation. And it's time that we reflect whether we have followed or deviated from his principles. His speech at the United Nations delivered upon our membership in 1974 is a seminal one, and it is set the character and gist of the underlying principles of a foreign policy. And so today, when the world needs powerful conductors at the international policy level, we have brought you this discussion on Bangabandhu's foreign policy on this Global Day. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be presenting you one of our most renowned and favorite person whose expertise on the topic surpasses many more. Please welcome our chair of today's panel, Dr. Fakhrul Alam, Professor, Department of English, University of Dhaka, and the first director, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Research Institute. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I must say that I'm no expert in this field. I'm out of my depth here. People like Professor Imtiaz Hussain and Ambassador Tariq Karim in the audience, and everyone else from the International Relations Department. But the one thing I can tell you is that I always feel at home with international relations people. It's just from being, in the same floor and just a walk across, and so you could say I grew up, in Dhaka University, 69 when I came in, with the international relations people and us mingling together. I had great friends in the department, and then later on, as I went on teaching, the teachers there were there. Lalifa and Niloy, I was meeting them all the time. So it was sort of like another home away from home for me. And Imtiaz, of course, is Joseph Bank. We go back a long time. And we also met in the corridors as students. So I will say that whatever confidence I have in this session today comes from being with people that I like, people with whom I've shared spaces in Dhaka University's academic spaces. And I guess I'm here also because I've been translating Bangabandhu's books, and I've been now recently I've just been appointed director of the Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Research Institute for Peace and Liberty. But having translated Bangabandhu's books, let me just say briefly, I know that Jessica has mentioned 1974 speech, the 1974 speech by Bangabandhu. But even the young man, the young politician, he was very conscious of global alliances and so on. Those words did not exist at that time. But when he went in 1952 to China, he had very well-developed views that kept developing. So, this was the sort of the beginning of the non-aligned kind of movement, you could say. And you could see his enthusiasm for the experiment that was going on in China. You could see that he was very anti-imperialist by instinct. You could see that there was always a criticism, implied criticism of what the Americans were doing, and Chiang Kai-shek, what was going on there. And you could see his enthusiasm. He didn't go to the Bandung conference, but I'm sure he would have felt very much at home there. He took another trip in China, which he didn't write about. And later on, we know as Bangladesh's enthusiasm for the non-aligned movement. The concept did not exist before, but I'm sure he'd have been a great believer in South-South dialogues, in this time. And he would be a critic of neoglobalization. He would be a critic of all of these movement. So just from my uh, being very close to Bangabandhu through his books, translating them, just from being someone whose consciousness was developing in the late 60s and early 70s, and as a citizen of Bangladesh, a very proud citizen of Bangladesh in 1971, knowing how Bangabandhu believed in what they said was South-South dialogue in South Asian, his attempts to mend the barriers, his presence in the summit in Algeria. And here was someone who took a very active interest in foreign policy. So today's event on Global Day in Mujib Show, I think this is a very wonderful event that has been organized, a very relevant event in every way, and I'm very happy to be here. And once again, I'd like to thank Imtiaz, Jessica, the global studies and governance program at IUB, and everyone else who's there supporting this event. We have a very distinguished panelists, the experts, all of them in their field, unlike me, and it's a pleasure to introduce them. I know most of them very well. We'll begin with Dr. Lailufer Yasmin, Professor, Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka, a young colleague I've admired for her academic orientation, outlook, and the way she's been developing. And she's going to speak about the development of Bangladesh's international relations, Bangabandhu's contribution. I certainly look forward to Lailufer's presentation.
Shall I start?
Yes, by all means.
Yes, sir. Sir, I'm trying to share my screen, sir. I'm still very, despite so many months of being in lockdown, I'm still not very equipped with this technology. So I'm not sure how to expand my screen. So I'll go this way. Thank you, Imtiaz sir, for holding this very significant event. Something that, with pandemic, we are busy with so many other things, but at the same time, organizing this kind of programs tell us that we should not forget certain things despite the pandemic. These are the things that keep us engaged, and these are the things that keep us new things that we can make out of it. In my paper, as you can see the title, Can Bangladeshis Think? I'm going to talk about those issues, that something that we have not paid attention to before, and then how we can actually see them from a theoretical perspective, as well as something that are missing in the study of international relations in Bangladesh. So here I'm going to talk about that particular issue. How do I put the next slide? Okay, so the idea, Can Bangladeshis Think? If you remember, it comes from the idea of Kishore Mahbubani. He wrote an article in the National Interest in 1998, where in 1998 this decade is the whole decade of 1990s. We saw profound changes in international politics. This is for the first time we saw a country. It did not fight for its own survival. That is, Soviet Union let itself disintegrate. Then we have seen from 1990s that countries do not fight against each other the way they used to do before during the Second World War, and before that territory is no longer the heat of the debate between states. We have seen that security is no longer military centric. So we have seen a number of questions arising in 1990s. Not only that, during that particular decade, Barry Buzan, Amitav Acharya, Ole Weaver, and a number of other international scholars, they started to question this idea of West centricity, that knowledge is created in the West, and why it has been so. And the question that whoever creates knowledge actually controls how global discourses are being channeled, how global discourses are veered towards a particular direction. So this West centricity is something that Kishore Mahbubani, by pointing this this out. He asked whether Asians can think. In his very interesting article, which later he elaborated in his book, that he argued that yes, at the same time Asians cannot think, and at the same time Asians can think. And he pointed out how by 16th century, the knowledge that came from the Arabs, the knowledge that came from India, the knowledge that came from China. Remember, I'm using them in a very nationalistic, sometimes in a regional term, sometimes in a nationalistic term. That the knowledge that the world gained by sharing from these regions, those were lost, and those were lost due to how we have seen colonialism took over, and that is when, and the progress of Europe has been remarkable since 16th century onward, with industrial revolution, with controlling of knowledge. One interesting example can be that who divides Asia and Europe? It is a whole geographic space, but with a certain idea, we think this part belongs to Europe and the other part belongs to Asia. This very idea, all of these were challenged, gradually challenged. But very interesting is that what Kishore Mahbubani pointed out, and later on other scholars pointed out, that even the challenges came from Western spaces. Even the challenges came from the scholars who are attuned with Western discourses, who work from being within the West. So why not Kishore Mahbubani, being a Singaporean, he represented Singapore in United Nations a couple of times. So why not this knowledge is these questions are coming from the East, not from the West, but from the East, from the scholars who reside in the East, who work in the East. So that is what something that I've been pondering over last few years, and I believe Fakul sir was also there when I sort of tried to talk about it in 2018, 17th March, the celebration of Bangabandhu's birthday. There also I raised that question, but here in my presentation, I'm just going to look at it a little bit different way. So the central argument is that, can Bangladeshis think? I shall later, point out why I'm using the word Bangladeshi. Can Bangladeshis think? And if Bangladeshis can think, I'm taking it, my assumption is that yes, Bangladeshis can think, and I am going to prove that by pointing out what are the policies, what are the ways Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman actually formulated our foreign policy orientation, our understanding about international politics, and we'll see in the end that particular directions have guided in a rising Bangladesh. If you have noticed recently, the Washington Post, foreign policy, all this at the global stage, Bangladesh is being portrayed so positively. I'm not talking about sort of a rivalry between India and Bangladesh, but I'd rather like to point out that for the first time, Bangladesh is at the global stage being represented for all the right reasons, not only for cyclones or violence or any other negative reasons. For the first time, Bangladesh is being recognized as it should have been, if we could have this kind of particular kind of challenges taken care of before. However, this is where Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's ideas on political pragmatism, political idealism, all of these issues come into being, something that we have not studied before in a theoretical perspective. We have rather pointed out on his political contributions at the national level, but his contribution at the international level, that is a missing area, that is a missing link. That is why I'm arguing, can Bangladeshis think? And yes, we can. So here, what is the analytical framework for this paper that I hope to write? And I know if I don't write this paper, Imtiaz sir wouldn't let me off the hook. So I really plan to write it. So first is, we are talking about knowledge creation. It may seem a very broad assumption, but I'm talking about in the area of particularly international relations, what are the particular type of knowledges that has been adopted as truly belonging to IR? Yes, we can go back as early as the period of Thucydides, but some of the theories, and then in South Asian context, Kotilla, in Chinese context, Sun Tzu. But all of these issues I'm going to bring in, and then of course in a very smaller scale, and then I'm going to talk about the West and non-West binary, or a dichotomous relationship that exists between the two. Very interestingly, when we, even for my thesis, I worked on this very definition of West. I actually initially I wrote a whole chapter on the definition of the West. Then my supervisor told me that I was exceeding my word limit. I had to, let it go. But when we talk, when we use the phrase, the term West, many of us, we do not have the idea what we are talking about. Are we talking about the West, which includes Norway, Finland? Now, who is the president of Finland? Very few people would be able to, answer. New Zealand is now in the news for all the right reasons. But then without Jacinda Ardern, we wouldn't have learned about New Zealand in the scale that now we are learning. So the West itself is a very controversial category. Some scholars also argue that Japan and South Korea, South Africa should belong in the definition of West. So I'm going to talk about this very construction of a perspective, and then the non-West, and how they are seen as detrimental to each other. There is a civilizational gap which actually does not exist. Let me give you an example. We talk about violence against women. We talk about what is how a civilized group of people should act. There has been a research done in Kalahari Desert where there are very, very few cases of rape against women. And there, when the researchers went there and tried to find out the reasons and asked the men that, she said no to you, why didn't you force you to commit to whatever you want to? The man, answered that she said no, and that's it. So civilization, how we see it in a very West-centric perspective, but civilization in the way that the West defines it already exists in some parts of the world, and we do not recognize that. We always think that it is a Western contribution. This is some of the issues that I'm going to bring in here. Then the relationship between power and knowledge creation. This is very significant because in international relations, you would see that when a power is at the center of global dominance, only IR flourishes both theoretically and both empirically in that particular area. And that is why we have seen that it took time in China to develop international relations. It took time in other parts of the world to develop international relations. America paid attention to establishing their own institution, own departments of international relations only after they were assured of their dominance globally, and they studied international relations. Why? So that they can identify the points, the areas of conflict, and they can maintain their dominance by understanding other areas, focusing on international relations. In this connection, even the Ford Foundation, the Fulbright Commission, all of this, they emphasized on regional studies, all these scholarships, all because America wanted to learn about others to remain at the top of global affairs. So we need to understand the relationship between power and knowledge creation. Then what are the post-colonial contribution to knowledge creation? This is where I emphasize Bangabandhu's contribution, and I emphasize on, in other areas, for example, the emergence of Indian IR, the emergence of Chinese IR, the emergence of Brazilian IR, the emergence of, African IR. These are some of the areas that we often, we think that, okay, they are all savage people, they don't study IR, but there's a rich heritage of development of IR from that particular continents and that particular perspective. That is something we often tend to forget. Next, okay, can Bengalis think? Can Bangladeshis think? So here I'm making this particular distinction because of a particular international legal mechanism that whether we like it or not, we have to accept to. That is the legal idea of sovereignty. Yes, the critical theorists argue that sovereignty actually stops people's movement. The reason for which state was created, it no longer can fulfill that particular wishes of people. Despite that, we do not yet have any alternative to the system of the state. Therefore, I emphasize on can Bangladeshis think. Yes, we know Bengalis think. We already know a number of sort of reformers, number of scholars who emphasized on knowledge creation, knowledge building, education, and all of these issues issues that made Kolkata as the center of the whole of Indian subcontinent, and that is why after 1857, after the mutiny, Sipai mutiny, the center was shifted to Delhi. That Bengalis know too much, Bengalis study too much, Bengalis are too troublesome, they are too political. So let's move out of from this place. And then there is of course that famous saying, famous statement: what Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow. So we already know the power of Bengal in knowledge creation. So here, when we are talking about the emergence of a sovereign Bangladesh in 1971, very proudly. So here, how we can organize our thoughts, how we can see a pattern of the contribution of knowledge from a national sovereign Bangladesh's point of view. That is my case study. That is my empirical study, which I'm going to use, state using the analytical framework, and later on, as I proceed with the case study. So here, I'm going to talk about the context. What are the national context? What are the international context? In the national context, I find two particular areas that we need to provide an emphasis upon during Bangabandhu's period. One is substantive, or at the practical level, there are three particular constraints that existed. At the ideological level, there were two particular constraints existed. I might be missing something, and the purpose of this presentation is that you can always ask me questions, or put more ideas here. So at the substantive level, we after 1971, Bangabandhu found a war-ravaged economy. We had infrastructural deficit. We have financial deficit. So these are three practical areas that he always needed to keep in mind while formulating his international policies. And then at the ideological level, the whole war from 1971's 25th March night, 26th March, the Declaration of Independence, till the birth of Bangladesh formally, legally on 16 December. The war was not only fought by people, it was also fought at the ideological level. It was also how Pakistan and other countries, they misrepresented about Bangladesh's, why Bangladesh is fighting, who are in Bangladesh that are fighting. Religion became an issue, identity became an issue. So all of these areas that Bangabandhu also had to keep in mind, that we need to revive to ourselves, that it is not about religion, it's about respecting all religions and keeping that mutual relationship intact. Then at the international level, we already know that Bangladesh is the only country during the whole Cold War period that fought a tremendous war of liberation, and it was the only country during the Cold War period that achieved its independence. There is no other instance like Bangladesh has done. So there was a great power rivalry. At one axis there is America, China, Pakistan, and another there is Soviet Union, India, and Bangladesh. And if you remember, when the secret documents were opened, it was we learned from the book written by Andrew Small, where he said that Henry Kissinger came to Pakistan. He stayed in Murray with the pretense of being sick and trying to recover his ill health, and then in a special PIA plane from Karachi, he was flown to China. And that is how the relationship between America and China, ping pong, known more famously as ping pong diplomacy, that was formulated, and China, PRC, People's Republic of China, gained this permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. So we can see that.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we have you finish in 5 minutes, because we're supposed to end at 8?
Only 5 minutes? Oh,
yeah.
Okay, sir, I'll stop. Okay, then let me go to Bangabandhu doctrine. Okay, so first of all, yes, this is something that we always cite, that Bangabandhu declared, we are a small country, we want friendship to all and malice towards none. This has been, and his vision was that we want to create Bangladesh as Switzerland of the East. So this is what we have seen, that how has even till today it has been, when we are dealing with during the pandemic time with India, China, and America, other countries, this has been the focus of our foreign policy. And then at the same time, the establishing control over territory, because there was this idea that the presence of Indian soldiers on Bangladeshi soil meant that Bangladesh has become a vassal country of India only. But no, but Bangabandhu visited India in February 6, and then consequently the declaration of withdrawal of Indian army was on March 1, and they finally withdrew by March 15. So all of this we need to see how Bangabandhu doctrine was defined. Then political pragmatism, we can see two particular issues that were problematic, that were identified, that need to be resolved: misrepresentation of Bangladesh and the identity issue. So in response to that, Bangabandhu formulated foreign policy by looking at long-term interests vis-a-vis short-term gains, and therefore he opened up relationship with all quarters to address the idea of how Bangladesh is going to extend its or evolve its own foreign relations. So I'll just shortly point out each of the areas. Political realism, despite America's role during the 1971 war, there was a difference between the United States of America, and the American people. So we have seen two different type of interests colliding. So this was recognized by Bangladeshis, this was recognized by Bangabandhu, and therefore we found that how the informal relationship between during the war of independence, how that crystallized in formulating on April 4, 1972 as a formal relationship between the two countries. Very soon we are going to celebrate 50 years of our relationship, and what started with $300 million dollars in aid now has turned into Bangladesh's either 51st or 52nd largest trading partner of America, and the trade balance actually is in favor of Bangladesh. So you can see how relationship has turned around. Then another area of political realism is how relationship with the Middle East formulated, that we needed Middle East for much needed aid to sort of recast the propaganda about the Bangladesh's identity. So all of these areas, Bangabandhu identified that how and why we need to sort of rebuild our relationship with the Middle East. So joining of the OIC conference was a culmination of this particular political realism and pragmatism. And at the same time, we did not forget the help of Soviet Union that was there during the period of war of independence, because Soviet Union holding a veto power that helped Bangladesh to continue its fight against Pakistan. Then of course there is this question of liberal institutionalism. A country cannot work in today's world all by itself. So Bangabandhu decided that we need to become a member of a number of institutions, international institutions. So despite our bid to be a part of UN was delayed due to China's veto. I'm coming to that a little later. Bangladesh, sort of became a member of IMF and other, organizations. So there was this idea that we need to create a new Bangladesh. So here is a quote. I'm not going to read it, but this is from Fakhrul Sir's book, Amar Dekha China, Notun China, সেই বইটা থেকে নেওয়া. So here we have seen that because of our particular experience, how Bangabandhu saw that the world was divided into two particular, extremes. One is oppressor and the other is the oppressed. His particular, visit during the 1950s during China, and particular visit with a number of, people in the 50s and 60s, that actually helped him to shape his vision that where do we belong and how do we need to sort of assist, other, countries who are fighting for their own independence. And that
if you could wrap up now.
Yes, I'll wrap it up. Just one more slide. So here we can see that how Bangabandhu envisioned of a world where there could be a coalition of third world nations, and that is how Bangladesh can reformulate its foreign policy. So in conclusion, I would like to argue that as Fakhrul Sir at the beginning said, in fact I forgot that Fakhrul Sir would be here, or else it looks like a little bit of about bribing, that I used a quote from Sar's writing, to find alternative modes of development that would allow countries to go of the global south to be free of the clutches of the neoliberalism and the far-flung net empire has cast over the world. That is the idea, that how a rising Bangladesh, it can actually take lessons from there, and how it can sort of recover, look at its lost treasures, and how history can help us bridge with the future. I end here now. I thought I had more time. I'm sorry for overshooting for a few minutes. Thank you, sir, for giving me the floor.
Thank you so much, Lailafer, and I'm sorry that I interrupted you. But when Imtiaz invited me, I saw 8 o'clock as the end, and I thought all of you knew that. So I should have warned you before, but I thought all of you knew that. And I also told Imtiaz I have another webinar. This is the webinar year, the year of the webinar. And so I want 2 hours in between. But, you know, we had a very good introduction, actually, a very wide-ranging historical perspective, and it did lay down, I think, the basis of what we're going to talk about. Others are going to talk about Bangabandhu's political realism, his political pragmatism, and the fact that he does everything, he did everything, thinking about our country and its place in the region and in the world. So, and I know now that we are, what Lailafer has said is going to be developed naturally, inevitably, by the speakers who follow. I would like them to remember that 20 minutes is the maximum, you know, that you can have. I'm going to cut you off after that. But I'm very pleased that Dr. Neela Ranjan Bishwas, Associate Professor, Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka, is our next speaker. And he's going to talk about understanding Bangabandhu's worldview, multiculturalism, and foreign policy orientation of Bangladesh. Niloy, I invite you to talk now.
Thank you, sir. Let me share my screen. I hope this is, you can see the screen now. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a great opportunity. I really thank Global Studies and Governance Program, Independent University, Professor Imtiaz Hussain and the team for organizing this. It's a great honor to share this panel with my teachers across the discipline of Dhaka University and other educational institutions. And particularly this is an honor because I'll be presenting this idea, this ongoing idea on the person who, I mean, it's very difficult to be objective when I'm doing a research as a social scientist, because it's not only about doing the research, it's about love, it's about passion, it's about the person who inspired how to be a statesman for many people in Bangladesh. So the title here for my study is Understanding Bangabandhu's Worldview and how that has shaped and inspired Bangladesh's foreign policy orientation towards multilateralism. So I will confine myself, in fact, into the process of shaping Bangladesh's foreign policy towards multilateralism. So I'll try not to go into how Bangladesh has constructed its relations or bilateral relations, in fact, in the post-1971 foreign policy. Therefore, the major questions for this study that I'm trying to creating is here, how had the leadership traits of Bangabandhu envisioned multilateralism as foreign policy goals and international norms for Bangladesh? And there are some other questions relevant to that. The major focus or the argument for me is Bangabandhu's charismatic, directive, and accommodative leadership has shaped the worldview, or introduced, or kind of like produced the foreign policy orientation, particularly the multilateralism foreign policy orientations in Bangladesh's foreign relations. Now, the reason why I'm saying charismatic, directive, and accommodative in course, I'll explain that throughout the process in the next 12, 13 minutes. the time permits. So the basis, the context of 1971 post-independence is, we need to remember that immediately after the independence, our first sort of goal was, or I should say objective, because if the foreign policy goal was friendship for all and malice towards none, but we were really busy under the leadership of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, was how to get recognized by the countries. Therefore, bilateral foreign relations where in fact the most significant part of, if we count the foreign policy activities or diplomatic activities of the newly independent country Bangladesh. But at the same time, in different speeches, messages, and activities of the great leader Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and led by him, the Foreign Office of Bangladesh has used very significant terminologies which basically paved the way of the foreign relations. For example, non-alignment, for example, peaceful coexistence, for example, friendship to all. Now, it is important for us to understand that how a leader has actually shaped these ideas and kind of imposed these ideas on the institutions that holds and promote the foreign policy objectives and activities on behalf of the country, the newly independent country, Bangladesh. So there is the point, like, why is it only about the institutional framing, or there is a significant role of an individual, a leader? So leadership role is very important for us to understand, and that I'm going to try in this study. Now, basically, as a theoretical framework, I think the foreign policy theories have given us some important ways to discuss these issues. I know that theories have been discussed, and I have the opportunity to also listen to the other panel where theories were discussed as well. For example, neoclassical theories. My previous speaker, Professor Yasmin, has also discussed different IR theories. I found mostly Western, but it is quite interesting to see that the foreign policy, if you look at the foreign policy theories, I mean, there are one basic debate which talks about, like, whether whose role is mostly important. So is it the state or is it the agent? So there are scholars who basically talk about that states matter more. So these are mostly coming from the realism and associated IR theories. The other one is the debate between the neorealist and constructivist. For example, Kenneth Walls talks about the idea of neorealism and how states in the international system basically decides the foreign policy, and that leads to the diplomatic activities of the state. Alexander Wendt, on the other hand, talks about, no, it is a construction processes. The state in the international system cannot always talks about how foreign policy will be formulated. Now, if you just keep these two, most popular debates or gigantic debates of IR and particularly foreign policy aside, and try to see what is the role of the leader or agent, particularly in foreign policy, I think it is very difficult to be confined within the theoretical schema of international relations. So one has to go to study psychology, one has to go and study social psychology and the intervention of social psychology on, in fact, the foreign policy. So one of such scholar is Margaret G. Harman, and I took the opportunity to use Harman's model of role theory in the foreign policy, which she applied on many countries, and tried to project that how an individual leader, a gigantic leader, and his or her cognition process actually contributes quite significantly in the formation of foreign policy, which I try to use here in my study to see how the cognition process, the political build, the political cognition of father of a nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, before 1971, his political career, his presence and everything, his speeches has actually contributed quite significantly to discuss that his charismatic presence in the post-1971, his directions in the post-1971, and his accommodative leadership has actually paved the way that how Bangladesh has moved towards a multilateral foreign policy, despite the fact we had to give quite significant significance on bilateral relations. So this was quite an interesting balancing, because we wanted recognition. So there was bilateralism, and it was quite important at that moment. But at the same time, because of the ideals, because of the accommodative nature of the leader, because of the directions, because of the charismatism, everything. In fact, so multilateralism came into important contribution. So, for example, a charismatic leader always accepts challenges and respect challenges. That was one's idea, or social psychology's idea, and that was inserted in the ideas of foreign policy. So, a leader who loves to give directions, but at the same time respects the challenges, doesn't really be afraid of the constraints. A leader is always open to information. He or she is focused about achieving the agenda, both with the bilateral partners and also in the multilateral platforms. And the focus can shift, depends on the reconciliation processes with the countries that are involved either at the bilateral or multilateral level. At the same time, a leader always empowers his colleagues, his fellow people, and not only moves ahead with the agenda of the country, but also raises the agenda of the others. So I have taken actually particularly four, in fact, multilateral, events where Bangabandhu had the opportunity to offer his speech and directions after 1971. And the first one was actually 1973. It could have been 1972, the UN General Assembly meeting, but we all know, unfortunately, the first veto that China has ever given was to block the membership of Bangladesh in United Nations, so we couldn't make it. Nevertheless, it didn't stop, and we finally made it in 1974. Nevertheless, in 1973 in Commonwealth, Bangabandhu picked certain words, and I like to put emphasis on the words because this study is based on the content analysis, and Harman's understanding of the role theory is also based on the content analysis, where she tried to project how world leaders actually promote certain areas in foreign policies, through foreign policies. So Bangabandhu in Commonwealth mentioned about that how economic freedom and political freedom and social justice are important for us, which is very significant. And he doesn't mean that economic freedom of only Bangladesh. It is about the countries of the so-called East, or Africa, Latin America, and Asia. He by that time the veto was given, and he accepted the challenges, and he mentions that yes, China provided veto, but we are still hopeful, and we think that we would like to pursue to get the membership of the United Nations, which is the pragmatism that one would like to identify. And he committed in the Commonwealth that we welcome the emergence of new international environment/order where confrontation and conflict may be replaced by mutual cooperation, conflict, and replaced by mutual accommodation and cooperation. So if we analyze his content, it is quite significantly clear to us that how he cited quite a few times, in fact, significantly the situations of the world context in 1970s, and how he is quite careful about that a multilateral platform should be important for us to resolve some of this crisis. Later on, in the NAM conference in 8 September 1973, he specifies he is more bold and directive about identifying and raising the issues of the plight of the Palestinian people. He talks about how the struggle for national liberations in many parts of the world that we need to be looked after, and we should definitely respect the idea of self-determinations, which we know is one of the fundamental principles of the United Nations, and also non-aligned movement. He talks about neutralization of Southeast Asia, zone of peace, freedom of neutrality. So these terminologies, and particularly zone of peace is the terminology he picked quite a few times, by which he means that countries which have been submerged through the bipolar politics of the Cold War should come out of that, given chance to express their ideas and values, and they should be treated equally, not as the bandwagoning partner of the then big powers of the world politics. So after NAM, when one would like to look at the Lahore conference of the OIC, the third multilateral platform where Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman gave a speech, and that was quite interesting because the politics before OIC conference was quite interesting, and I'd like to take just 30 seconds to explain that Bangabandhu was not interested, and when the OIC chief and Kuwaiti foreign minister, they came to Bangladesh before the conference to convince Bangladesh to go to Lahore, Bangabandhu made a fantastic balance between a bilateral demand that Pakistan should recognize Bangladesh, and then in fact, Bangabandhu agreed that Bangladesh should be positive about participating in this platform, because this is a multilateral platform, and Bangabandhu has always been positive about multilateralism with the opening arms. But it has been achieved because that was the leadership of the Bangabandhu who has achieved this thing quite significantly. So Bangabandhu thanked the chair in his speech, which was the then Pakistani Prime Minister, and promoted the idea of peace and welfare, promoted the idea of Islamic brethren, despite the fact that Bangabandhu was used to be the symbol of secularism. But Bangabandhu also accommodated these challenges and accepted, for the sake of the international order, for the sake of the contribution of the OIC to bring peace in the international order. So that was the matter of accommodation that I'd like to offer. That is quite interesting. So I'm not a very big fan of statistics, but I wanted to do a content analysis in terms of percentages to see what words came quite significantly in those multilateral platforms, in the speeches of the multilateral platforms of the Bangabandhu speech. So more or less in the 5 speech out of 23 international speech that he has given since 10th January 1972 till 15th August 1975. So the term peace came 151 times, which takes more than 2% of the total words that he has been used. And similarly, if you see world, Asia, region, justice, rights, Africa, those were the terminologies that repeatedly came in the international speeches which was given in the multilateral platform by Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Now, Margaret Herman says that by analyzing the terminologies that a leader used, you can actually get an idea, if not completely but partially, that what is the mental cognition and the entire political cognitive process of a leader, which is translated into the foreign policy formulation of a particular leader. And in my case, it is Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Lastly, the last and the final one, which was the maiden speech of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman in 74 UN General Assembly, where the speech is fascinating. More than 9 minutes, he used we to mention that the collectiveness that he always believes, and the spirit of the collectiveness, but sometimes he used I, which says that he wants to take the responsibility, which he has taken in his entire political career, not only to establish the rights of the self-determinations of the Bengali people of the country, but also he would like to establish the rights of the international world. He talks about the oppressors, the brethren feelings of the oppressed Arab world, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and many other countries. He talks about peace. He talks about the zone of peace in the Indian Ocean, which we are now talking quite significantly in many conferences as part of the maritime security. The sense of international and multilateral motives were quite significantly present in all the terminologies, terms, and words that he has used in the multilateral forums. Finally, if we accumulate all the ideas and go back to what I started with, the framework, charismatic, directive, and accommodative, it was quite significant. We have to remember what challenges were there. Pakistan was a big challenge. China was a big challenge. Chinese veto, we remember. Bangabandhu was in Nam when King Faisal, then King of Saudi Arabia, was present. Bangabandhu hugged him despite the fact that Saudi Arabia did not recognize us, when the Nam, conference was taken place. Now, how do we explain this? A leader who was not recognized, but he was, shaking hands with a leader, the country who has yet still not recognized. I think I see this as political pragmatism. I see this as the charismatism of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. I see this as the nature of accommodation that he grew within himself with his political career, and that is translated into the foreign policy and international worldview of Bangladesh. He has always been open to information. There is an interesting story in S.A. Karim, former ambassador S.A. Karim's book, Sheikh Mujib, Triumph and Tragedy, where he says that despite India's consensus or despite India's liking, he sent KM Kaisa, another foreign office ambassador, as an ambassador to Myanmar to do a back office, back channel, negotiation with China so that we have a good relations, or China, recognizes us soon. So that was pragmatism as well. He knew that if, that would be a suicidal attempt to some extent, or that would not be liked by some, other friendly neighbors, but he was not hopeless about China. He was quite hopeful about other countries who were yet not recognizing Bangladesh and, creating stumbling block. So KM Kaisa, who used to know Chinese language quite significantly, was made the ambassador of Myanmar and used to be a good channel to opening up relationship with China. So his focus was not only getting bilateral, recognitions, because many would write that, the 1971 to 75 foreign policy can be identified as politics of recognition. I respectfully differ with that. Politics of recognition was an important agenda for us, but Bangladesh and Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's agenda was also to make friendship not only bilaterally, but also make a vibrant presence in the multilateral platforms such as NAM, OIC, United Nations, Commonwealth, and others. So with that, I'd like to end my talk, but I'd like to identify that individual's role, agent's role, leader's role is very significant in foreign policy to promote multilateral relations, and that is the agenda that I'd like to highlight in this study. Thank you so much for your patience and the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Niloy. I know you rushed a bit, but I think you said quite a lot. It complemented and followed nicely from Lailufar's statement. And I particularly like the content analysis bit because, world and peace, they came out first. So the Bangabandhu that you presented in foreign policy, in thinking about international relations, is the Bangabandhu that I think all of us love: pragmatic, charismatic, lover of peace, accommodative, somebody with a view, a window into the world, and of course an activist, very close to the people, and activist in everything that he does. A very well-rounded portrait, and I'd like to thank you again and move on to our next speaker. I wonder if he's here. In what I've been given, the next speaker is Shahab Enam Khan, who's Professor Shahab Enam Khan, Department of International Relations, Jahangirnagar University, and his paper is Post for Bangladesh Foreign Policy: The Predicaments of 1971-1975 Power Balancing. I leave it to the organizers to tell me. I can't see him on the screen.
I'm here, sir.
Okay. Well, welcome, and thank you very much for coming. I was told that you were going to be late, so okay.
Apologies for my delayed presence, because I'm mostly spending my time in the Rohingya camps for the past 1 week, and the situation is not very conducive or perhaps very harmonious. So that keeps me pretty much busy, and therefore I'm not going to really speak from my book or perhaps from any kind of presentation. I was listening to two of my colleagues, and fabulous and without any doubt fantastic, and they have touched upon very relevant theories and very relevant content analysis that you have identified. But perhaps one of the academics who doesn't really believe in theories, going back to, again, theoreticians such as Robert Cox, who has repeatedly said that theory is always for someone and for some purpose. So therefore, I'm not sticking to any kind of theoretical composition. Rather, I try to understand what actually Bangabandhu tried to do over that period of time. So I'll be taking multiple variables, and of course, there will be events, there will be his interactions, and obviously his quest for the developing multilateralism will certainly be ruling my particular paper. Now, as I wrote in my abstract, which I earlier sent, in which basically I tried to understand that what kind of narratives were present during that time. And when we talk about narratives, is it a status narrative, or is it an intellectual narrative, or perhaps the narrative that Bangabandhu believed and implemented, or perhaps the narratives which were forced by the external forces, or perhaps the structures. Now, definitely we can always take some sort of pride in saying that the whole Cold War was in a mess, and we maneuvered very well through that process. But perhaps there is also untold, untouched stories too. And there lies the success of a state leader like Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. And if you look at this, his high principle in terms of not only independing or liberating a state, but also his high principle in terms of delivering the state to the states of the world. And perhaps that's exactly the focus that Sheikh Mujib has always pursued. And that's exactly why we are now in the forefront of the geopolitical and geostrategic equations. And definitely we should not forget that when his interaction with Indira Gandhi, and particularly his surprising way of dealing with Indira Gandhi after the war and asking her to return the Indian army, and perhaps to literally asking the Indian government to reduce its plan of engagement with Bangladesh, has actually stunned not only the Cold War equations, but also the power fulcrum that we have seen. Now, even if you look at his idea about political realism that Niloy was talking about, or perhaps Professor Yasmin was talking about, but perhaps beyond that political realism, his high principle, which is grounded on the very basic of the idealism. And perhaps when we talk about his idealism, we're talking about the way he has seen this state, he has seen the world. So therefore, he has always been constructing the world the way he has always seen the Bengali nationalism as well as the society, which means he has always prioritized that his human aspiration rather than the political aspiration. That's exactly where Bangladesh's nationalism and their identity formation took place. And he was very much keen in forwarding the Bengali identity. And Bengali identity here, I mean the Bangladeshi identity, and in which he has always been very proud of. And even if you look into his interaction with Fidel Castro, or even his interaction with then, which Niloy was talking about, that hostile, pretty much hostile King Faisal, perhaps he has shown a greater humility. And that humility is something that is missing in the contemporary politics. But however, let me go back to that particular global phenomena that was taking place. And of course, we knew that there was a Sino-Pakistan relationship growing. And of course, Kissinger's presence during that time in China or Beijing is something that we should not forget when we talk about the underlying causes between Bangladesh and China's relationship, and then, of course, the China's role in the United Nations. And obviously, if you look at the very fundamentals of strategic autonomy, as I mentioned earlier, the Indira Gandhi's case, or even when he went to Algiers and later on when he went to Lahore, is one of the greatest strength for Bangladesh's foreign policy, showing that we can be compassionate and perhaps we're the victorious nation. And very fundamental and ethos of being a victorious nation is something that we have to bring back in our foreign policy at the moment. And that's exactly where I often mention that the missing point or missing link in Bangladesh foreign policy at the moment is Bangabandhu's essential ethos of really bringing the strategic autonomy back in the narrative. Now, today we hear that pro-China, pro-Pakistan, pro-India, pro-United States, he has never been into that. And perhaps he was always, as I mentioned earlier, he was always pro-Bangladeshi. So hence, when he was very pro-Bangladeshi, he designed his foreign policy consciously, subconsciously, or perhaps without really falling into some sort of methodological understanding of foreign policy. He has always pushed for some sort of values into the international system, which is the very core of Bangladesh's constitution. Now, even if you look at this state leader, who is the centenarian this year, has always been dealing with a very hostile situation, bipolar situation, in which you had, which I quoted as a misbegotten decade of the Cold War. And in that particular time, he has to deal with eccentric utopias coming out from the Marshall Plan, post-Marshall Plan, this world. You had the new international organizations coming up with new kind of agenda. And obviously that was essentially been a bone of contention for the Indians as well as for the Pakistanis too. Even if you look at the very idea of what we call political interregnums, where you see the recession of political development or political growth, means you also saw a very phenomena of non-democratic government rising across the world. And even if his friendship with Castro was a big issue for the Americans, his friendship with the Algerian president, everything actually molded the international composition too. Now, I don't want to be very ambitious by saying that he has shaped the entire political process or the global politics, but perhaps his value was well understood by all these leaders across the non-aligned movement countries. Now, that was the time when, of course, you saw that astigmatic adventures of our neighboring countries going on, particularly between India and Pakistan. We have looked into that very idea of expansionism was taking place too. Now, in that moment, how Bangladesh maneuvered through this balance of power is something we have to really, really revisit at this moment of time. And obviously, as I said, that egoistic or eccentric utopias, you also have seen the job, some sort of self-satisfied elitism going on. And in fact, Bangladesh's governance process that time also determined how foreign policy was being shaped. Even if you look at the post-war, where I in a sense agree with Niloy by saying that that was a post-recognition or the recognition time. Perhaps it is more than that, actually. It was more about strengthening the social governance and political governance, and therefore to promote the country through the very difficult structure of international Cold War. And given all these particular ideas and obviously egoist elites or political leaders or whatever we have seen, the main problem lies with Bangladesh is then again whether we had enough political structure to really carry the value of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's foreign policy or principles. And perhaps we have seen over the next, at least for 15 years or to 20 years, that particular principle was essentially missing. Now, with all this background, I apologize that I don't have fancy slides that my colleagues had, but certainly with all these backgrounds, I think that he was talking about equitable bilateralism too. Now, when I talk about equitable bilateralism, and he never hesitated in explaining what he means by equitable bilateralism, in which he has looked into the development more than the foreign policy, more than the strategic or perhaps the defense or what we call security cooperation that is now dominating the structure of Bangladesh's foreign policy, unfortunately. And he has, of course, as Niloy has rightly mentioned, that the multilateralism, institutional multilateralism, and perhaps if you look at the foreign ministry's document back in 1973-74, when the DG admin was dealing with Bangladesh's presence in OIC and other places, that's a very, very interesting time when Sheikh Mujib actually has talked about reforming or perhaps forming a regional institutions. And of course, I'm not saying that the SARC came out of that, but certainly that concept note is still very much present in the foreign ministry's documentation. So I would certainly bring that into this particular paper, obviously, because I get to see that there was some sort of initiatives that he was talking about. The next thing that, of course, he came up is perhaps he was talking about the global governance. Now, when global governance comes, that he was equally comfortable that he had spoken to US state leaders, he has spoken to British state leaders, and perhaps he was in London. And when he was coming back from London, he got Giulio Curie after coming back. And I'm not sure whether after coming back or during his stay, or he went back to London to get Giulio Curie, but certainly the Giulio Curie award was there. And that's the first recognition that Bangladesh got in international atmosphere. And that is a recognition for his leadership, astute leadership. Now, don't forget that that's the time when the arc of instability was unfolding. when we talk about unfolding, means that if you start from Afghanistan all the way to Myanmar, the arc of instability was in making, where you have seen that the Russian, post-Russian, and of course you have seen that the military junta coming in. Because if we go back to, I'm sitting very much in the Rohingya camps, going back to a little bit of history, the first group of Rohingyas actually came in Bangladesh back in 1948. And during 71 to 75, the Rohingya issues were actually being discussed in the foreign policy documents. And I will definitely quote that in the paper, that how that was being discussed. And certainly I'm grateful to several foreign secretaries who has enlightened me on that particular issue. So he was also been talking about, talking to several state leaders, including Tufail Ahmed and others, where this is a very fascinating part, because I had the opportunity to really speak to a lot of people who has been a part of 1971, enlightening me by saying that Bangabandhu was extremely conversant about McMahon lines and Radcliffe lines, and what would be the implication of this McMahon or Radcliffe lines in future. So definitely that will be reflecting in this particular paper. And with those issues, and I often get into some sort of debate or argument with Professor Amina Mohsin, that whether we are a post-colonial or post-colonial state, or perhaps we are post-colonial state. So that's exactly also been reflected in his narratives. Even if you take 1971, Shatimanch Bhashan, where he actually has set some sort of understanding that Bangladesh has to be independent, and perhaps has to become a very post-colonial world in our country in a true sense. Now, Castro, Bhutto, Nixon, whatnot, that time, Kissinger coming, and I was literally fascinated by reading the trial of Kissinger, and which I think two of my colleagues should read at some point of time, is certainly one thing that will be dominating this particular discourse that I'm trying to bring in, or the narratives that I'm trying to bring in, and how Kissinger's basket case was taken very much inside the prime minister. Bangladesh's ethos and values will also be coming in here. Now, let us also look back to understanding that Bangabandhu repeatedly talked about during the 60s, and particularly during the Chhaya Dafa and his political narratives. Now, there is a fantastic work that has been done by SecDev. When I looked into their political analysis and looked into that what kind of narratives were used, the buzzwords, and his buzzwords are very interesting. He has talked about the labors. He has talked about the global labors. He has talked about kind of, I'm not saying that this is a very Marxist oriented understanding of labor, but certainly that is an understanding which has really talked about the proletariats. And when the 1974 Bakshal and everything came up, when the global community was coming quite hard on this particular regime, certainly I can back up that particular moment, but not saying that essentially I endorse, but definitely I can back up by saying that these narratives and speaking for the proletariats and the subalterns were always been there since the 50s and 60s.
So Khan, if you would wrap up now.
Yes, sir. I will be wrapping up in 1 minute. That subaltern or proletariat ideas of state or perhaps economic development has always ruled his understanding and global views. His visit to China, his visit to other places will also be coming in. So therefore, I think, where I stand a little different, in contrast with Professor Lailukar Yasmin and Dr. Biswas, is essentially I will be not recoursing myself into too much theories, but rather to frame the entire understanding of balance of power and how he maneuvered through the balance of power, through the normatives and, of course, existential issues that Bangladesh faced during that time. So it is less to do realism or perhaps pragmatism, more to do what Bangabandhuism can look like. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Khan. Now, when you were speaking at the beginning and the ending, when you talked about not being theoretical, I couldn't help smiling because theory is very much part of what I've been initiated to, because we never had theory before. And Terry Gilton says there's, that anyone who says that he does not have theory, that's a theoretical statement. And another complementary thing is that there's no theory without practice and there's no practice without theory. For example, I was very fascinated when you talked about equitable bilateralism. Obviously, that's very theoretical in this basis. And, it was fascinating to listen to you talk about multiple variables and the word narrative, which has become so fashionable lately, or because of theoretical developments. But what I think made your talk very distinctive and very complementary to the earlier talks is the element of detail that you used, and of course, like Lalifar, the very wide range. It was very good listening to you all. And now I think it's time for somebody whom I admire, who I've known for a long time, Professor Delwar Hussain, with whom I've met over the years in meetings and so on, who's Professor Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka, who's our sole discussor. And I was wondering if those who are listening and if they have questions to the paper presenters, and also what Professor Delwar Hussain says, what Delwar says, if you could also use the chat box if you want to. I think that might be a good idea for you to ask questions. So I invite.
So we already have questions in our YouTube link, which will follow after Professor Delwar Hussein's discussion.
So I will invite Professor Delwar, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And good evening to everybody. It's a fascinating discussion, and I appreciate and in fact I thank my colleagues and also my former students, three speakers, Professor Lailofer Yasmin, Professor Shahab Enam Khan, and Dr. Nilaranjan Biswas for presenting a wonderful kind of findings on the topics they have chosen to present in this very important seminar. And this is a wonderful seminar in the sense that we are actually trying to understand Bangladesh foreign policy in a historical context, and also in the context of the contribution of the father of the nation, and also the great architect of Bangladesh foreign policy. And very unfortunately, I mean, this period in our international relations, that is Bangladesh's international relations, was almost oblivious in terms of academic engagement or scholarship. But now these are coming, and particularly this is coming based on the contribution of the great leader Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. So this is really a great contribution by the independent university and particularly by the Department of Global Governance. Well, I mean, I really like the ideas promoted by the presentations of three speakers, and since the topic is on understanding Bangladesh foreign policy, so it's a single focus, and then Bangabandhu is rightly linked with Bangladesh foreign policy, and so these three papers are well linked, and in terms of ideas, in terms of contexts, and definitely there have been some differences from theoretical and philosophical kind of approaches. And I can go paper by paper, but I think I don't have much time, and it's a very tough job actually having comments on three papers in 5 or 10 minutes. But I just want to say that these are all wonderful papers, and they can be developed to a paper for publishing, and it will definitely contribute a lot to understanding of Bangladesh foreign policy, and also to the contribution of the great leader Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. But just one thing about Lailofer's, of course, Lailofer has mentioned about theories and also the understanding of Western IR or Eastern IR. It's fine. I mean, we are talking in this line for quite a long time. But the use of the term political realism to understand Bangabandhu, I think it is not rightly placed, because Bangabandhu's policies, of course, I mean, we can use the term pragmatism to some extent, but the way he actually promoted, I mean, his ideas, and also Bangladesh, and this is much more civilizational, much more value oriented. I mean, we don't see much contribution by leaders in the world. I mean, we always look at the West to see who will actually contribute in the world in terms of normative way, in terms of civilization. But here we have such a wonderful person, wonderful leader, great leader, that who actually, even, I mean, from Pakistan's jail, I mean, when he was released, and the way he talked, I mean, during the interview or deliberations in London on 10th January 1972, I mean, he proved the very day, I mean, after having suffered, I mean, jail for more 9 months, and then he was so bold, so extraordinarily courageous to talk about not just Bangladesh interest. He is a leader who actually, the very first day of his release, he talked about the collective goods of the world, the public goods of the world, which is based on civilization, which is based on values, which is based on ethics, which is based on humanity. So this is, I think, political realism does not go with Bangabandhu, because the so-called Morgenthau's idea of political realism, it is just the contrast of, I mean, Bangabandhu's personality, Bangabandhu's thoughts, Bangabandhu's worldview. So perhaps we can use other things. I mean, I understand. I mean, Railofar has also mentioned other ideas like liberal institutionalism, which is very rightly identified, and also pragmatism to some extent. But of course, Bangabandhu's I mean, contribution in terms of his philosophy, his thought, and he provided the very framework of understanding our foreign policy, unfortunately, which was neglected by the subsequent regimes. But now we can see these are coming back. I mean, the very idea of friendship to all and malice towards none, it is not that simple statement. I mean, then here you are actually talking that we are ready to make friendship with different types of regimes. I mean, when we talk about global politics, we are not, I mean, so much, selective. So I think Bangabandhu's every word, every idea, I mean, it was very civilizational. It was very cosmopolitan. It was very human emancipatory. So this thing is the real contribution, not only Bangabandhu, it's the contribution of Bangladesh, I mean, through Bangabandhu. And this is really very important. This is actually guiding us even today, when we actually, we're dealing with so many powers in the world. And I really want to mention three decisions of Bangabandhu, I mean, three decisions that actually Bangabandhu achieved. I mean, his style of leadership in the world, his style of diplomacy in the world, and being a very strong believer in multilateralism, in normative ideas, in civilization. And he could actually make India to withdraw troops just in 4 months. This is a very, very rare decision in the world. I mean, I don't think as a student of IR, we would find any such kind of thing in the history of IR. I mean, a country which has contributed to the liberation of a war and just withdrew troops in 4 months or 5 months. And then the achieving recognition of the United States, the power who actually threatened to bring the Seventh Fleet. And this power, the so much powerful country in the world, recognized Bangladesh just by April 1972. And this is the contribution of Bangabandhu. And then Pakistan, the Pakistan state was compelled to recognize Bangladesh. I mean, membership to OIC was not the big deal. The big deal was that Pakistan was forced to recognize Bangladesh, and that was achieved by Bangabandhu. So I mean, these are the things, I mean, we can explain by different theories, different philosophies, different ideas. And also I would like to share with you that if you just, Bangabandhu, when he was actually, Bhutto was bargaining with Bangabandhu when Bangabandhu was in jail or was in Pakistan, that how Bangabandhu would be coming to Bangladesh. And Bhutto was insisting on that Bangabandhu should fly through Tehran to Dhaka. And Bangabandhu vehemently opposed it. You see, he was in Pakistan and he faced this verdict of that he could have been killed anytime or executed anytime. And they did Bangabandhu. He was bargaining with the Bhutto. No, I would not travel through Tehran. I would travel through London. So he convinced Bhutto. He forced Bhutto to accept his idea. And this is the beginning of foreign policy of Bangladesh. He won even if from Pakistan that things would have been done in his own terms, and he made it possible. So I think, of course, I mean, to examine Bangabandhu's foreign policy, I mean, in the very short period of Bangladesh, I mean, it is so much in just 3.5 years. I mean, as a student of international relations, we become really surprised, really amazed to see how actually the difficult time. I mean, now if I just contemporize that, now we see India China rivalry, and we are becoming very impatient and very kind of confused how to deal with India and China when they are in rivalry. And there is some sort of Cold War type situation in South Asia or East Asia, and also the relations between China and USA. Also, it is becoming a challenge. But you see how Bangabandhu dealt with the Cold War, Cold War. I mean, this blocks or this such a very what Professor Shahab mentioned. I mean, the very tough times marked by the Cold War. And how the former Soviet Union and the USA actually used I mean their resources in such a negative and such a destructive way. I mean it was a very destructive way the United States and the former Soviet Union used to actually maintain their dominance, to maintain their hegemony in the world. And Bangladesh could become independent, and then Bangladesh could have a very independent foreign policy under the great leader, our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. So this is really, I think, I mean, we are very proud of it, and I think this is a very good contribution by the university and by my former students and very well established scholars. They have really worked hard and they have contributed a lot, and I appreciate, I mean, the theories and ideas they have actually shared with us, and definitely it is going to be much more I mean rich and very useful I mean later on, I mean, when they will actually make the full paper. And I thank the organizer again and for giving me the opportunity to speak a few words and also learn a lot from Fokrul sir and also from the speakers, and this is a good opportunity, and hopefully we'll continue this discussion in different forums. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dalwar. Yeah, you're so very gracious. And I'd like to thank everyone present. It's certainly been educational for me because I'm not an international relations person. The only thing that I'd like to add from my own exposure to Bangabandhu, I of course was a young man, 71 to 75, and what Mr. Dalwar said, what Shahab has said, Professor Shahab has said, and others, 71, 75, I agree with that. But I would say that as someone who's translated the books, we should go, and all of us, and even from an international relations perspective, to the last 35 pages of the last book, which has not yet been translated into English. The translation is done and is about to see print, but the Bangla version. Because you can see from Bangabandhu's detailed comments on his visit to New China, and his engagement with other people, you could see the seeds of the non-aligned movement and the thinking that led to the non-aligned movement, and Bangabandhu's subsequent role in South Asia, in the Algiers conference, and elsewhere. You could see his different attributes, his empathy, his cosmopolitanism, which was a word Delaware used very well, his emancipatory perspective on things, which was also there was certainly it's been very educational for me. Thank you all very much, and I'd like to, of course, end my part of it by thanking Imtiaz, Jessica also, and the team, the international the team in the Global Studies and Governance Department for inviting me. Imtiaz, thank you very much.
Thank you, Fakrul sir, for being here. I would now like to invite Dr. Imtiaz Hussain to say a few words.
Let me just speak about Fakrul Bhai now, because I think we should have the question answer session and then we will close it. And what can I say about Fakrul Bhai? He has been in academia, continuously producing. I think he's done quite a bit of work on Robindranath also. And so certainly with Bangabandhu, 20, 30 years down the road, whatever students get to know will have come in one way or other through, I think, Fakrul Bhai's work. And that is quite a contribution, quite a legacy. You name somebody else who's done that. And for that, I think we really owe a huge round of applause and gratitude to Fakrul Bhai for coming. I think you are a living symbol between all of us, among all of us, of what scholarship should be and what the country's real messages are in terms of scholarship, expressing everything in terms of scholarly language. Thank you so much for pushing and pumping this side of Bangabandhu. And congratulations on your new position. We thank you ever so much for coming, and we have to sadly let you go before you are your other audience misses you.
Well, I'm sorry to go because I have another webinar coming up and I need to rest a bit and I've got things to do. But I have to tell you that I was very enthralled. I really paid a great deal of attention to all the speakers and I felt very interested in what was going on. Thank you all very much. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Good night.
Thank you, sir. So now we move on to the next part of question and answer. Senior scholars, the junior scholars are there with a lot of questions for you. I now hand it over to my colleague, Hussein Ahmed Tawfiq, to coordinate the session.
Thank you, sir.
Before the question answer, can I add a few things, sir, if you allow me?
Yes, we'll give you a minute. Shahab, please go.
Okay, just a quick point. I'm quite cognitively aware that I'm falling into the trap of theories for sure, but definitely my understanding has a contradiction within myself. The first thing is that if you look at the relationship between Houari Boumediene, who was the then Algerian president, who sent a plane to Prime Minister, perhaps, I'm sorry, all apologies, to Bangabandhu to attend the Lahore meeting. Now, how do I frame it? Is it a bilateralism or is it a pursuit of multilateralism by two state leaders? Now, again, when you, as Professor Delwar Hussain has mentioned, that within 4 months, when you are asking them to take their military back, am I going to really put it within the frame of bilateralism or multilateralism? Or perhaps even if you look at the prime agenda, which Niloy has contradicted, and I too contradict prime agenda in a sense in the contemporary narratives, that post-recognition. And perhaps he's reaching out to Lahore and then subsequently his speeches in the United Nations. Does it really reflect only multilateralism, or perhaps it is based on the very ethos of bilateralism? That's exactly my problem is. Now, how do I really define his relationship with Castro, or perhaps his understanding of Kissinger, and altogether the way within that 5 years of time, or perhaps even if I shorten it, the 4 years of time, how he dealt with all these things, whether he really had the fancy of defining his relationship through the prisms of very Western concept of bilateralism or perhaps multilateralism. That's exactly where I say that certainly the Cox comes in and says the theory is always for someone, whether we have to really see Bangabandhu from his own theory. That's where I stand at the moment. So these are my own academic, or even if I consider it as humbly scholarly contradiction happening in my subconscious mind all the time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shahab. You will get the last chance with the question answers because others also need a second chance. So, Tawfiq, go.
Okay, sir. There are several questions in the Facebook live feed and in the YouTube comment sections, but due to the time constraints, we have decided to actually narrow it down to 3 questions, and all those 3 questions are directed to the 3 professors who presented their papers. The first question was from one of the students of Independent University, Bangladesh, and this question was directed towards Dr. Lailufa Yasmin, Madam. What were Bangabandhu's foreign policies towards the Eastern countries in contrast to the Western countries, including Israel? Do you think high context and low context cultural orientation mattered? The second question was directed towards Dr. Niloy Ranjan Bishas, sir. Bangabandhu
Go
adopted.
one at a time. Go one at a time.
Okay.
Tawfiq.
Okay.
Okay, I need to unmute. Could you please, because I did not get that, what is high context culture or high culture context, that part, please. Could you please repeat that part?
Madam, I'm posting the question in the chat box.
Chat box, okay. 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 The as I said in my presentation that his idea was to emphasize on local cultural indigenization of cultural outlook, and that is why I pointed out that can Bangladeshis think that he actually thought that how Eastern countries were oppressed by the Western countries as the oppressor. So here I find that his outlook was how to create a sort of a bridge between the both, and here he emphasized on cooperation, and that is why you can see at one hand in bilateral relations, multilateral relations, as Niloy has pointed out and others have pointed out, that he was very certain that yes, where we need to develop multilateral relations, where we need to develop bilateral relations. So that was there that his identification of how we can diversify our options, and at the same time he emphasized how local ideas and local issues that must be taken into cognizance while talking about international politics, and that was the crux of his relationship towards Eastern countries, that Eastern countries had various multifaceted problems, those were not being addressed, and this must be brought into multilateral forums. So that's how he dealt with it, and at the same time I did not, as I said, that high context and low context of cultural orientation, is this meant for the leader himself or any particular context, because I'm not familiar with this particular type of phrasing, so I'm not sure if I can talk much about that. So if anyone want to clarify that for me, I would be happy to answer that. What is high context and low context of cultural orientation? Sir, I
Okay,
did not get this.
we'll come back to that and let's get the other
Okay.
questions done.
Okay.
The second question is towards directed towards Dr. Nilo Ranjan Bishar, sir. Bangabandhu adopted a secular governance policy. but why it did not deter him from joining the OIC, Organization of Islamic Council Summit in Lahore?
Thank you. That's quite interesting. So I think we need to understand the term secularism, the way how it has been defined in the Western context has never been contextual, or has never been the definition that we have accepted broadly in South, particularly the way how it has been a founding principle of Bangladesh as secularism. So secularism doesn't mean that no religion. Secularism is always the coexistence of all religion, and one has to always understand that it is an undenying fact that Bangladesh has been a country of majority Muslim population, and since I have been kind of trying to understand the role of a leader in multilateral platforms and going for multilateralism. So it was a pressing need at that moment, not only for the sake of the national interest, but also to promote global peace, global justice. I mean, OIC was definitely a significant platform that Bangladesh wanted to join at that moment. So therefore, I mean, it would be very difficult to tag, joining OIC as opposed to, or in return to getting the recognition from Pakistan, because OIC was a reality and it is still a significant platform. So it was a platform that Bangabandhu, and with his leadership, the entire Foreign Office and the objective of the foreign policy of Bangladesh at that moment was to join the platform. So secularism and the way how we have adopted secularism definitely gives us a wide opening options to join a multilateral platform that works for global peace and justice. So OIC was definitely a pragmatic choice.
May I answer for a minute here? Just a minute or 30 seconds.
Please do, ma'am. Please do, ma'am.
Okay. I just wanted to, add with Niloy, who very succinctly pointed out that the meaning of secularism is very misunderstood in our part of the world. It does not mean, denial of religion. It means coexistence, accommodation of religion. And please do not forget that India is very willing to join OIC as well. So you need to look at that political reality, and the way secularism is defined, the way the word secularism emerged, it always in the context of United Kingdom back in 17th century, 18th century, the idea of secularism emerged so that you can practice your religion privately, or you have the right not to practice religion, but at the same time do not fight over religions. That was the crux of this. That was what Europeans learned after periods of dark age, that they had to fight against each other for establishing their particular right of religion. And that is why secularism does not mean that you cannot practice your religion. You can be 5 times praying Muslim, practicing, or you can practice your other religion. That does not mean that you won't have respect for another religion. That is a very wrong concept, and this is really, we need to have a greater conversation on this. We need to really understand this, because we are not against any religion.
The third question is to Professor Shahab Enam Khan sir. What was the nature of the relationship between Bangabandhu and the US Nixon administration? We all know that Nixon's national security advisor, who later became the Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, labeled Bangladesh as a basket case.
Sorry, Tawfiq, I couldn't hear. Can you repeat? Sorry.
What was the nature of the relationship
Tawfiq, can you hear me?
Sorry, I can hear you. Sorry, I can hear you.
Chat box, Shahab.
Tawfiq.
Sir, can you check the chat box?
Yeah, let me do that. So what was the nature of relationship between Sheikh Mujib and, okay, the first very interesting part that you should always remember, that the relationship with the US was kind of in a lukewarm situation. The first problem was that the South Asia was in the background. So Kissinger went to China and essentially tried to negotiate on the Pakistan issue. So Bangabandhu never hesitated to really have a good relationship. And in fact, he had a couple of phone calls with then the Secretary of State, John Irwin. And even John Irwin back in 1970, and I assume in 1972, asked the Nixon government to recognize the Bangladesh government. And perhaps that is exactly what was in the mind of Sheikh Mujib, because he knew that these were unfolding. Now, what were the sources of his intelligence? Because I do a little bit of work on intelligence all the time as an out of my own curiosity, and definitely that was, if you look at the WikiLeaks, and even WikiLeaks back in 1970-71 cables, you would see that he was advised not only on the ground of the Irwin's advice, but also within the pressure of the English monarchy. And the English monarchy had a very strong role to play to convince that particular regime to look into Bangladesh issue from a very human perspective rather than a political perspective. So therefore, I think Bangabandhu was well aware of the fact that at some point of time, Nixon administration will have to come and balance with Bangladesh. And that's exactly my understanding, and I'm talking from the very basis of facts that those are available in public domain. Does it satisfy?
Thank you, sir.
And
Thank you
last
very
thing,
much. We still have
Jessica,
lots of questions.
Oh, you have more questions than okay.
But what we were doing is we are running out of time, and I would request all the panelists that will be sending you the questions so that you can write it back to our students. We'll deliver it back to them, because a lot of questions are coming in still.
Sartila, can I have 10 seconds?
Sure, sir. 10 seconds. Yes.
Very
Are we
idea of
timing you?
secularism. I mean, I have two of my colleagues. I mean, I love them like anything, but just a very basic of secularism is all about identity, how identity constructs your secularism. So what the Europeans would think about secularism is not necessarily what Bombo. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I now request our very own Professor Imtiaz Hussain to give his concluding remarks on this panel.
Let me just comment first on Lailufer's chat box comment, and you're absolutely right. The Kissinger had never said basket case. I think the word he used was bottomless something, maybe pit or something like that. I don't have it in front of me, but you're right. You're absolutely right. Basket case was never mentioned. However, let me try to bring things to an end to a very invigorating, and I tell you, never ending conversation on this. And therefore, we need to come to some kind of a closure because the big fish lies after this. And what I would like to say basically is that just one comment on the substance that we had. You all talked about theories and narratives. We've heard things about attitudes and so forth. But how many of you remember in the 1970s, if you were alive and you saw the pictures, there were symbols. I can give you 2 or 3 symbols that cover everything you have said today. 2 or 3 of them were mentioned. One symbol was meeting Fidel Castro. That symbolized a lot of things. And we saw that picture that Niloy showed us. Another was a picture when Bongo Bundu was walking with Boumediene on one side and Sadat on the other. That also said a lot. And then there was one with Bhutto. And these are the ones that basically say it all. We're talking about multilateralism. We never heard, is it the first step towards moving away from India? I have not heard anyone address that. And maybe it is something we might want to look at. Because if you're going to make friends with Pakistan again and the Muslim countries again, you're doing something that might be drifting a little away from the secularity and the socialism and everything that India represented. Remember our 4 principles then, the founding pillars that we had, they were exactly the same as India's. And therefore, there might be some questions or maybe some answers we can find from there. I must tell you, our third global day is basically coming to an end. And I should add that it is shedding light. Earlier, the afternoon session, we saw a lot of new light on the COVID policy making and potential innovation coming out of that. And they were very substantive, very, very credible. And then today, just from listening to all of you, I think we see greater light of what Bangladesh's future foreign policy might be. And it's for you to bring it out and show it, especially through chapters book. Is Dr. Marufa here tonight? Could you show yourself, please? Because she was in charge of the first foreign policy panel today, and she will be basically recruiting all the chapters from you so that we can start processing them and making something out of them, a volume that we hope will be something authoritative enough to be seen again 20, 30 years down the road. And so everything that you have said today, I think, do make a lot of sense. You have all worked on it. We'd like to capture, make the necessary corrections and the compilation to give an authentic foreign policy kind of a foundation from the original years. Let me finish by saying thank you to quite a number of you. I must first of all say thank you to all of the technicians who have helped us and the technocrats, and particularly Mahfouz. If you are here, you might just show yourself, because his are the shoulders that IUB's online transition depends upon. For this entire year, Mr. Mahfouz, our Deputy Director of CITS, he's the person in charge of all of this and all the webinars that we have had, and he's done a fantastic job. I've seen him from the word go, and he's impressed me tremendously. Secondly, we have had a lot of our faculty members going out of their way, certainly beginning with Dr. Marufa, and then lecturer Jessica, lecturer Tawfiq, and lecturer Amjad. Every single one of them has chipped in so much that it was a very satisfying day and global day for all of us. I would also like to acknowledge all of our students. And in fact, I do have a little bit of a surprise for you. Your contributions and everything today impressed me so much, and we haven't answered all your questions. Excuse me, but what I wanted to tell you is that in our Facebook page, your page, I will tell you all the details. But from now on, we're going to have something like a Global Day Award for students. And what this will do is look at everything that you're chipping in to the growth of knowledge under global studies. For example, all the questions that you gave, you might collect a point for every question, and then contributing to fixing it up, you might collect 5 points for that. So next Global Day in October 2021, we will see who has the most, and the top 3 will get the award. And so the greater the involvement, the greater the payoff now, the greater your long-term, I think, global studies, international relations, marriage. All right, I do want to also thank all of our other guests, all other students, and all of the faculty members who've been here, participants of all sorts. Thank you ever so much for helping us through the entire day. Particularly, I would like to thank all of our leaders, IUB leaders, the trustees certainly, and our Vice Chancellor, who has marshaled almost all the academic work and exercises that we are conducting, I would really like to thank all of you. And as I just mentioned to Fakhru Bhai, he's certainly the future warden, if you like, of Bangabandhu and his memory. So thank you all so much. And yes, Lailufer, I do have that sandwich I owe you. I'll give it one day soon.
Thank you,
Thank you.
sir. I'll live for that promise. Thank you.
Please check the chat box, sir, if you have time. It
I am
was not
seeing a lot
Kissinger
of
who
Dr.
said,
Kissinger.
Yeah. Thank you, Shahab. This is the
it's
exact
not,
words.
it
Yes.
was not Kissinger who said the bus,
Absolutely.
it was Johnson.
Yeah,
There
absolutely.
you go.
And
Absolutely. And thank you so much. This is the essence of scholarship,
yeah.
hitting it
And many
on the head.
Yes,
And
sir.
Shahab, that was absolutely wonderful.
No, thank you.
Beautiful.
And
Thank
this
you,
is
everyone.
many American strategists and policymakers, they also they are not aware of it. Many of them come here in Bangladesh and say, we were sorry that we called you a basket case. And that's a very wrong statement.
It's okay if someone wants to be sorry by themselves for what they have not done.
Thank you, everyone. We just
Thank
have
you,
to wrap up. It's really been a long day,
Yeah.
and our technical team has been since morning with us. And thank you again for being with us, all the students out there, and Professor Delwar Hussain. Please drop by to IUB to the Global Studies and Governance program. We'll be very happy to have you. We oftentimes see Professor Niloy, Lailufer Miss, and Professor Shahab. It's your turn now to come and be with us and have a coffee. Anyway,
Can I
Thank you.
second that? Certainly, Dr. Delwa, please come by. And all of you, one day we'll just have a little coffee session or something here.
okay.
Thank you.
We'd love to do that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Delwar,
I'll be
please.
happy
And
to,
I want to,
join.
sir, I want to put all of your colleagues to the camps sometimes, because I was caught on gunfire exchange yesterday. And
Ouch.
so I
Bye.
think all of them should come and visit and see that how the Rohingya refugee issue
Oh.
actually looks like.
Definitely will be there, sir. And
Jessica
And
will get back to you. Jessica will get back to you on that, because we are looking for Rohingya-based articles.
right. So let's
I'm
all
growing
call it a
weird.
day today. And we just have to sign off from this cloud at this moment. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Stay safe, maintain social distance,
So kind of
and
you, sir.
all the
Thank you.
best.
Okay, thank you all.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
sir.
all.